Welcome back to our final episode of Season 4. We're going to start today's episode with a Tyler's Take. Our CEO shares a quick perspective on agentic AI workflows, a topic that keeps coming up in conversations across the industry. But before we jump in, our annual conference Forum is coming up March 24th in Scottsdale, Arizona. Forum is the best conference in multifamily and brings together hundreds of top leaders who believe there's a better operating model for multifamily. This is not just a conference for current funnel customers. It's a small executive-level room where honest conversations about AI, centralization, and the human experience are candid, practical, and very real. This year, Forum takes place at the 5-star Camelback Inn in Paradise Valley, just outside Scottsdale. If these are the kinds of conversations you want to be a part of, you can register now at funnelleasing.com/forum. Let's turn it over to Tyler.
The future of automation is agentic workflows. If you have embraced automated conversation and you've embraced centralization, the changes to date are going to pale in comparison to what agentic workflows can do. Let's go through the Middle East change example, right? But 60,000 units, 300 communities, 25,000 times a year, there's a Middle East change. If you haven't centralized, that's only, it's like 80 times a year, roughly 1.5 times a week at an individual community is there a Middle East change. And so if you automate that away with an agentic workflow, it's probably not even worth the effort, right? That's like 15 minutes. But if you take those 25,000 tasks and you centralize them and say nobody on site is responsible for those anymore, and because we've taken all that work off the sites and we've centralized, and this is happening at Cortland and Canada and elsewhere, that's a lot of work. But it's probably like 5 to 15 people that are working on all those Middle East changes. And if you could automate those away, then those roles could again go back to the higher value closer, renewal specialist, fraud specialist, rather than the administrative, let me make you an addendum to add a pet to your policy, right? And so the agentic future is coming, and the agentic future will only benefit those who have embraced the new operating model, especially centralization.
Today's guest is Tesho Akindele. Tesho played 9 seasons in the MLS with FC Dallas and Orlando City. He's now a Charlotte-based developer and self-described athlete urbanist. We talk about how reading Walkable City sparked Tesho's passion for designing neighborhoods where people can live, work, and connect on foot. That vision ultimately led him to Camp North End, where he helped transform a fenced-off industrial site into a thriving community. Along the way, we dig into zoning, NIMBY challenges, and how technology is a part of how they deliver hospitality at Camp North End. Let's kick it off. Tesho, welcome into Multifamily Impact, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Excellent. To get started, we talked a little bit about in the intro, but would love for you to unpack a little bit of your background and how, as a real estate developer, you might have a unique perspective given that background.
Yes, I guess I'll go back to when my first job happened to be professional soccer, which I guess is a pretty unique first job. When I played for 9 years in MLS, I played 5 years at FC Dallas and then 4 years in Orlando before retiring. And so in that middle point when I was like, man, I'm starting to get a little bit slower than these young guys. And I needed to look around at what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I started just having conversations with people. I started posting more on social media, trying to put my thoughts out there. And one thing led to another, and I found the idea of walkable neighborhoods, the idea of real estate development and building those places, and just really fell in love with it. And so I think my perspective as someone who didn't grow up in the real estate industry at all, had no real training in it, but just fell in love with it from like core principles essentially. And someone also who I traveled all over the country playing soccer, and so I got to see lots of cities all over the world. Actually, I was in Central America, so seeing so many different cities, who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, and then also being like an outsider to the real estate world. I think it's a perspective not many people have. And I like to describe myself as like an athlete urbanist. I'm much more urbanist now than athlete. Before I had a little more athlete before, but there's not too many athletes talking about this stuff either, and I'm trying to encourage more people to raise their voices.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for that intro. And I think if you're all right, I'm going to go a little off script because you hit on some points that I think are really interesting. That the years that you were playing in the MLS, I think that when folks look back over the last decade, I had a good friend who was from Brooklyn, and he described it that he now lives in Austin. and that there's just been the kind of like Brooklynification of the nation. And so you described obviously these walkable neighborhoods, and you live in Charlotte today. We're going to talk a lot about the development you have in Charlotte. So what was it, look, just to unpack that a little bit, you're a soccer player, you're single, you're moving from college into adulthood. What were some of the attributes that you saw in walkable neighborhoods, and the hybrid of living and working that stood out to you, or perhaps even certain cities that stood out to you as you think back to what really appealed to you with the concept of walkable neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think my first experience, and I didn't even know I was having the experience, but I went to Amsterdam with my wife in the off season. So we went to Amsterdam my first time over there, and it was just full of life. People everywhere, biking, walking, sitting out on even it was cold, but people were sitting out, having a coffee by the canals, beautiful. And I had this experience, I love this, but I don't know why I love this. And then so later, when I ended up reading a book called Walkable City later on in my soccer career, and then that was the moment this is why. So that book really breaks down like vibrant neighborhoods when people are just out and about, you're making connections with people you already know or with strangers, but like life is just pushed into the streets instead of stuck in cars or stuck in homes, or pushed into public, I guess is a better way to say it. Life is pushed into public, and I loved it. And then looking back, I was like, that's what it was in Amsterdam. And people have these experiences all the time in their life. Like, I bet anybody who went to college, what about your college campus? Life was pushed into the campus. You can see people out on the quad or walking to classes. Or when you go to Disney World, that's a big one. That Disney World is a great walkable neighborhood, Main Street, anywhere you go in Europe. And people have these experiences of, man, I love this, but they don't really know why they love it. So since I learned why I love it, I've been trying to put words to it, because I think a lot of people do have that same feeling of loving it, enjoying it, and not knowing what it is.
Yeah. And one of the things I appreciate, Tesho, in that is that I fell into the housing industry, did not make it as far as you did in soccer, but didn't think that I would love housing. But I think there was something, I lived overseas for a little while, and there's something just that every human being on this planet needs a home, and that the experiences are so vastly different. And when you start to see those differences, I think that there's a really cool opportunity to put your stamp on it, to your point of bringing perhaps an Amsterdam style living to a place like Charlotte. But so let's keep looking in the past. You mentioned obviously when you went to Europe, it felt different. Where did you grow up prior to being a professional soccer player in Dallas and in Charlotte?
Yeah, I grew up just in the suburbs of Colorado, just like an everywhere kind of place. You find the town I grew up in looks like every other town in Utah or Oregon or wherever across, even Charlotte, just a very traditional suburb. And so walkability just wasn't something that was on my mind. We had to drive to get anywhere pretty much, and that was just what I accepted.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, we're going to come back to some of those concepts. I do want to, because we have a lot of, including multiple people here at Funnel who are big soccer fans. I am curious, you lived the dream. We were talking about how the European housing situation, maybe there's some stuff for us to learn, but you lived the American dream of a kid from Colorado, grew up, became a professional soccer player. Now you have this opportunity as a real estate developer. I'm curious, just specifically looking at the highs and lows of being an athlete, being a professional athlete, the wins, the losses, making teams, getting cut from teams. Are there any lessons now that you take from those wins and losses as a developer, as a leader, as a business leader, that you still kind of lean back on?
I think one thing is just knowing that life is going to go on. Like even because like you said, I got cut from teams and it felt like my world is over. Or I remember one game specifically against Inter Miami. I was in Orlando. I stepped up to take a PK, and I had made every single PK in my career up to that point, and I missed. I shot it terribly and I missed. And I had this just overwhelming sense of dread come over me. But the next day I woke up and it was fine. I had the chance to go again. So I think that kind of like mental toughness and resiliency is something that I built as an athlete and can carry into development, which is just it can be a lot of banging your head against the wall over and over. So I think that was a skill that I was able to take with me.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think that I'm curious maybe if I turn the page more towards today and that bringing that resiliency and now looking at the concept of walkable neighborhoods, livable neighborhoods, you see it afar and it feels somewhat distant from perhaps the normal suburban experience of growing up in Colorado or Dallas or Orlando. I'm curious when you started to unpack how you could make your impact, right? What were the barriers that you saw towards walkable living? And you mentioned it kind of anywhere you go in Europe. I've often reflected myself on why is it that in the U.S. we are so car-centric, right? Why is it that it's so difficult here in Tampa, Florida, if I want to go find a coffee shop, it's a 10-minute drive. What were the impediments? Because I think a lot of folks, if they have the goal to be a professional athlete like yourself, there's many clear rungs in the ladder. I have to be the best club player, the best college player, and earn an opportunity in perhaps USL and work my way up. I'm curious for you, as you thought about moving, you described this experience, what were some of the first areas you latched onto in your career that you thought, okay, maybe this is how I make that impact?
Yeah, I think zoning is a big one, I would say, obviously. So it's like you said, if you're in Dallas and you want to go to the coffee shop, you got to drive 10 minutes. That's because it's illegal to build a coffee shop in a neighborhood in Dallas. You can only build them in certain pockets, whereas like in Amsterdam, you can put coffee shops on the corner. It's fine. And so zoning is a big one with like where you can put a mix of uses, because if you want a walkable neighborhood, you need to be able to walk or get to the office, for example, which people do every day, or schools, or you need to be able to get to the restaurant or grocery stores. But in America, we have like separate zones. It's okay, we live in this zone 1 over here, we work in zone 2, and then we do everything else in zone 3, and they're all separated by like highways. So you driving everywhere is built into it. So I would say allowing more flexible zoning, and then also like more dense zoning too, especially close to the city. Most cities, I think people are starting to realize this now, but most cities are 75 to 90% zoned for only multifamily housing. So every other type of housing is illegal, which is pretty wild to think. It'd be like saying in 90% of the city, the only car you're allowed to drive is a Mercedes-Benz. Like, yeah, people love Mercedes, but not everyone can afford a Mercedes. So why make that the only car you can drive? That's what we do with housing. We say only single family housing can be built in 90% of the city, but most people can't afford a single family house. And we wonder why housing is unaffordable. So instead of only Mercedes-Benz, we need to allow people to drive a Toyota or a motorcycle if they want. Like, just give people different options of housing. And that goes back to zoning as well.
Yeah. One of the things I've heard you describe yourself before, Tesho, is a passionate urbanist, and you reference like athlete urbanist. And I think that comes through in the way you discuss it. And I think that I've also seen you post about that specific concept that you had talked about, what we describe sometimes as NIMBYism. That there's a lot of folks that want to be compassionate. I don't think anybody would disagree with the concept that you just articulated of we need all types of housing. But they do in reality, when it comes time for my neighborhood, that's why, you can push back, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why I perceive we have the zoning laws we have, is there's a protectionist mindset of I've earned my way into this nicer neighborhood, and therefore I don't want those darn apartments where I live. I'm paying top dollar. So I'm curious at Camp North End, maybe let's unpack that a little bit for the team, where you've been able to be a part of the development of this amazing community. Was that a similar challenge in this neighborhood, or had the zoning issues already been tackled there?
Yeah, Camp North End's a great example of how you can get amazing things when the zoning is right. That was an industrial site when my company bought it in 2017. So if you came to Charlotte, 1 mile north of downtown, you would find this big 76-acre industrial site, and it was just surrounded by a barbed wire fence. Nobody was really going there. And then our company bought it, was able to rezone it to kind of the most flexible zoning that the city has, which is UMUD. It's like mixed urban district zoning. And so that what that allowed us is to turn that industrial kind of wasteland of sorts into a neighborhood. So we are allowed in Camp North End to build housing, which we've done. We've built apartments, we'll build more. Office space, we've built office space, we'll build more. And restaurants, small shops, small businesses, artist studios. So we're literally allowed to put all the components into one place. And the zoning is really what unlocked that. And then when it came to the NIMBYs, Camp North End is a little bit unique because we were taking away what was something that people didn't like. We literally took down a barbed wire fence and allowed people to come in. And it's not like we displaced anybody to build what we've built. So I think it's unique in some sense, because a lot of developments, like you might take away a restaurant, and we didn't. We were just completely a value add to the neighborhood. So all the surrounding neighborhoods in the north end of Charlotte have really rallied behind us as something that's a good sign of investment in their community.
I think there is something repeatable there, to your point of every city, and we've referenced Europe and other countries, you travel, you see these relics of the past, right? That the way the world worked, especially in America and the places that you traveled, used to be you live in the suburbs, you live outside Denver, you commute in every day for work, right? And it was designed for that, the bedroom communities. I think one of the beautiful things, and you did a post about this, about working in the intersection of your work day, your personal day, the meals, and how you were able to do all of this without ever getting in a car. I think there's a huge demand for that in the country, but we also have a glut of real estate that probably is not appropriately designed for the new era, right? There's a lot of unoccupied office spaces. Have you, within your company, your business, are you looking for some of those other kind of reuse opportunities? Because I would imagine, to your point, NIMBYism is a hard thing to tackle. but there are blights in different cities. There are different eyesores that people look at and say, hey, if we could turn that into housing, now I'm on board, because otherwise it in fact probably attracts the wrong type of behavior. So I'm curious, within your organization, if that's something you guys have looked at, of how do we repeat the success of Camp North End by looking for other potential kind of eyesores or negatives and turn them into this positive?
Yeah, so Camp North End, we have 76 acres. All of our pipeline is on that same site, basically. Yeah, but like you said, we are reusing what was there. And I think that especially in Charlotte, that matters, and that kind of helps stem the anger of NIMBYs per se, because Charlotte is a really beautiful city, but it's also a really new city. The banks came in and built some beautiful buildings in downtown. It's nice, it's clean, but there's not too many old buildings here. And so the fact that the buildings that we are repurposing into office space and small businesses, those are built in the 40s and the 1920s. And so I think doing something like that to hold on to the character, at the end of the day, it's all about telling a good story too, I think. Yeah. And so I think what we've been able to do is tell a good story of keeping this old place that's very important to Charlotte and turning it into something new. And there's other projects around Charlotte that are doing that, and you do see them get a lot of support. But another thing too is probably expanding on places that people already like as well. So I live in this neighborhood called Noda in Charlotte, and it's walkable. It has a little kind of traditional main street downtown with shops and some houses. And I think one way to get more walkability around the country is to take those walkable pockets and expand on them. So Noda right now has a few shops. Can we expand the business and office district of Noda, make it a little bit bigger? Because those are already places where people have accepted and opted into a walkable lifestyle. So instead of trying to build walkability in the middle of nowhere of a suburb where people are choosing against it, how can we expand areas like Noda, or places that are even smaller where there's just a little bit of an ash burning, and can you kindle up some walkability in some of these pockets around the city?
I can tell you, again, living in a place like Tampa that is not walkable at all, there is massive desire for that. I mean, even traditional retail developments are moving more and more towards no driving zones, concert areas. I'm curious, you mentioned some of the elements of walkability, really the intersection of live, work, play. What kind of community engagement are you doing at Camp North End to bring folks out more so than just the restaurant, an office, or a bedroom? Are there other kind of community engagement levers that you guys are pulling to try and really build that sense of community?
Yeah, we have a whole team of people actually called the community team. And so they do all of our marketing and all of our events. So at Camp North End, we have over 1,000 events a year. And what's really great about it also is you can come to Camp North End and have an experience at any price point. So if you want to come and have a free experience, like on Thursday nights, we have this big turf area. We put up a giant TV screen and we let people come watch a movie for free. So that happens every Thursday. On Friday nights, we have live music for free under the water tower. But if you want to come and grab a coffee, $5, $10, you have that experience. At the very high end, we have an events company who does weddings and corporate fundraisers, so the highest price point type of thing. And so one thing we've done to involve the community is just bring in different types of people from the community. So it's people looking for a free experience with their children, or people wanting to have a very high-end corporate experience. And then the types of businesses also that we curate, I think, helps build the community too, because we've really thought of it as, who are the tastemakers in Charlotte, and how do we get them to come here and they will bring their people with them? And we've done a really good job at that. We have one tenant called Thrift Pony, for example, who has brought in her very specific type of people, but they come out. And then we have streetwear, and we have skateboards, and we have plant people. Just a really good mix of businesses has also helped that community, and you end up talking and interacting with people who you might not usually on a different day.
By the way, I've noticed as a former soccer player, you put some turf out there and all of a sudden people are happy. I was in Orlando this weekend for a soccer tournament, and the hotel had a big turf courtyard, and there was dozens of kids and families just throwing balls around. So That's a go-to move. So you mentioned obviously there's housing in the community and you're developing more. So one of the things, I followed you for a long time on LinkedIn, but one of the things that perked my attention was you have a community kinship at Camp North End that is managed by Greystar, happens to use Funnel for its CRM and for its AI. In this new world where people want, or a large demographic of individuals want walkability, but we're also sometimes very disconnected. And so we're leveraging technology, people are working from home. I'm curious how you all are thinking about leveraging AI. I think you mentioned bringing in core tenants, and I would imagine Charlotte's always been a great place for banking and financial technologies and startups. But how are you thinking of the way in which technology intersects with the brick and mortar of real estate, right? Because you at the end of the day are in the business now of physical assets, but technology plays a role in that. So I'm curious, any thoughts on how that will play a role as you develop the rest of Camp North End?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me is that people are on their devices all day, and how can you integrate that into the system? So one thing is technology wise, like having Wi-Fi across the whole campus. So if you leave kinship and you're working and you're taking a meeting, like you can just walk around the campus and you'll still be on the Wi-Fi taking that meeting. Another thing that comes to mind is just in the process of, let's say somebody who is deciding where they want to live and they're looking at or evaluating kinship. I really think of what we're doing as from at the Camp North End side and specifically kinship, it's hospitality. Like you need to take care of people and give people a luxury experience. And so like hospitality comes from the first time they walk in your building. What does it look like? What does it smell like? How are they greeted? And then there's a whole suite of technology. Like if somebody's going to apply to be a resident there, what is that process like? Is it clunky and you're printing out papers, or is it seamless and tied into their devices and the way that people like to operate these days? So I think meeting people where they're at, making things seamless, and really having a hospitality mindset from the first interaction, and then the follow-ups too, because you want to make sure you're following up with people that are like leasing prospects, for example, but you don't want to bug them. So how often are you following up? Does it make sense? Are you following up accidentally twice and not knowing about it? So I think just having a really good hospitality mindset and integrating that technology into the way people already operate.
For what it's worth, we just put a new AI chatbot on kinship at North End, so check it out. And it speaks unlimited languages, so I think it's a good example of how technology meets consumers where they are. So as you guys are designing living spaces in the community for renters, so you mentioned obviously that in many ways the world was designed around single-family home sales. We're seeing higher and higher demand amongst different generations, individuals who choose to rent, individuals who are downsizing, right? Perhaps they lived in the suburbs and they want a walkable lifestyle. They're moving into Camp North End to kinship. What are some of the kind of intentional decisions? You mentioned obviously already meeting them where they are in technology. I'm curious if there's any design trends that you guys have made around the number of studios versus 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or as you're looking at other housing units on the 76 acres that you have, the amenities that appeal to those folks. Because to the point, often apartments were viewed as this box and they're all, but I think as we embrace the hospitality mindset that you've referenced, amenities and the experience shows up in different ways. So I'm curious, as you think about the renters that choose to live in the development that you're a part of, if there's any factors that kind of stand out to you in the decision-making process.
When you're looking at urban areas where people are having tight living quarters, a really important amenity that a lot of times it gets VE'd out of projects is big windows. So we have big windows on all of our units, and then we have balconies on most of our units as well. And I think just giving people like that connection to outdoors, to a little bit of fresh air, I think it's a really big, important one. And it's something that's easy to VE out, but if you think of your quality of life as a renter, what's going to make, you got to think of the whole life cycle of a renter. And when people do have a little bit of access to fresh air, to more light, natural light coming into their space, I think they're more likely to enjoy that place and stay there and sign an extension when their lease comes up, instead of just being like, all right, this place is dark and I feel smothered. I'm like in a box and I need to get out of here as soon as I can. So that's internal to the unit. And then external, I think the number one amenity is a walkable community. So like, and that's the huge advantage that we have at kinship is everyone at kinship, like I said, they can walk from their apartment 2 minutes to get to that outdoor movie, 3 minutes to get to the live music on Friday nights. They can walk 1 minute to get to the coffee shop, 4 minutes to get to the best burger in Charlotte. Shout out to Surefire Burgers. And it's all right there. And I think you can't also, that means a lot to the quality of life of a person. If me and you are on this podcast right now and I have 10 minutes before a meeting, and I live at kinship, I can walk out and get a burger in 10 minutes and come back to my next meeting. And you can't do that if you live out in the middle of nowhere. So that's a huge kind of community amenity.
That's great. Yeah, and I think that in this day and age right now, apartment operators by and large are struggling with a lot of factors, but there's been a lot of apartments built in this country, which is a wonderful thing. And standing out and being differentiated is challenging. And I think that being intentional about building somewhere that has that sense of community is fantastic. And the walkability. And I definitely wrote down Surefire Burgers next time I'm in Charlotte. I got to check that out.
You will not be disappointed, I promise you.
All right. So you talked about, and I've referenced it a little bit, but you guys aren't done with this project with Camp North End. You've got, I think, somewhere north of 1,000 homes you're looking to still build. So what needs to happen? Obviously, I just referenced that right now, developers have been challenged. We've seen new home starts come down significantly over the last 2 years. A lot of that's just the interest rate environment. But what kind of things as you guys as a company think about next steps and how you really continue to, because I would imagine there's a bit of a flywheel here of if I get a visit, I'm going to go check out Surefire Burgers, right? And then I bring one of my team members who's from Charlotte. He's going to want to get in, but you guys are probably 96% leased up. So what things need to happen for you to be able to unlock additional housing units on the property you have today and really unlock a bigger sense of scale?
Yeah, you said we're 96% leased up on our retail at Camp North End. So as soon as something comes off, like available, that it gets swooped up for retail. What we really need to do to drive that flywheel forward is lease up the other stuff. So we have office space that's 2/3 leased, but there's still some available office space. We need to fill that up and then get Kinship delivered in December. So we're only 9 months, 10 months into that lease up process, making sure that that lease is up and is strong. And then when renewals come, that we're able to keep those renewals as well. So I think like a lease up of the office and the multifamily, and then durable leases too, that those leases aren't just coming here because they're getting concessions and then they're going to concession hop to the next project as soon as they can, making sure that they actually, when they come here, they get that hospitality experience and they know they can't find it anywhere else. So they want to stay here next year as well.
Yeah, props to our partners at Greystar for you guys hired them as your management company. So it's a big challenge in this environment, but one I'm sure they're excited to work with you guys on. So I think zooming out of Charlotte a little bit, you think about one of the challenges, you mentioned traveling around the country, and real estate is local at the end of the day. And you mentioned that you all had a lot of support in your community because it was a location where you were really adding a lot of value. You've heard different politicians at the federal level talk about like ways to, on the one end, potentially we need more housing pricing controls. On the other end, we need to unblock all this development. Are there any learnings that you would have as you think about your hometown in Colorado or when you lived in Dallas? Are there any learnings that you've seen in Charlotte of things that are working that might, as a housing industry at large, that you might make recommendations on?
Yeah, I guess one thing is just transit-oriented development. So in Charlotte, we built a blue line light rail, which kind of runs north to south through the city. And if you go anywhere along that light rail, you see those walkable neighborhoods. You see a lot of density. You see just a lot of energy excitement. And that's where the cranes are. The cranes are all up and down those kind of corridors. So transit-oriented development is huge. Any cities who can get the funding and support to build more and better public transportation, I think you'll see it. And it's a residential development boom, but also office. Like a lot of offices, they want their employees to have options for how to get to the office because people are tired of paying $200 a month to park in the parking garage. And if I could get here without doing that, a lot of people will take it. It's giving the people the option to get to their house or to work without driving is a big one. I think, and going back to NIMBYs, this is a little bit off topic, but one thing I think from a higher level is cities need to take the power out of just like the people who live right there. Like all the power can't be there. And one good example is in Charlotte, there's a neighborhood called Elizabeth, and there's a community college and a park, and hospitals are there. It's right on our streetcar line, on and on. Amazing amenities. There's already density there. And they were proposing to build a multifamily building, and some of the neighbors came in, objected to it. So let's say there was like 30 people objecting to a 300-unit multifamily building. And so what happens is the cities, they end up listening to the people who are in the room, but they forget about the voices that want to be there. Because if one day that project gets built, that's 300 people who would be there advocating for that project. And we way overweight kind of 30 or even 10 sometimes voices who come out against projects. And we forget about the people who don't have the opportunity yet to be there and speak up for themselves. So I think cities need to think about that when they're setting their zoning and when they're doing these rezoning meetings. I get you're listening to the community, but what about the broader community, the people who want to be there, but they can't because we haven't given them the opportunity?
Oh, man, Tesho, that was so well said. And I think that the transit-oriented development is so insightful, and I think that there's maybe a self-fulfilling prophecy that sometimes we look at ourselves as these American suburban cities and think that, nobody's going to get on a train here. I live in Florida, right? Like I've mentioned, and I was in Orlando last week with a business partner, and I had to go back to Tampa. He was going back to Miami, and he was ecstatic for his ride home because there's a beautiful train system between Miami and Orlando that everyone uses now. It's pleasant, it's on time, and I had a 2-hour drive on I-4 that was miserable. I couldn't work, so I'm sitting driving the car. I'm hurting the environment, and I think that when that line shows up between Tampa and Orlando, I can imagine exactly what you described, which is every stop is going to be a beacon of development. Everyone's going to want to put their multifamily there, their retail there, their office spaces there. And then I also really appreciate what you're saying just about the voices that are in the communities. It's the pulling up the ladder behind me I got here. And you mentioned Jay Parsons was on, you and I were talking about, he was on the last podcast. The data doesn't support that mindset. It doesn't hurt home values to add more housing, right? If anything, having those cool people in the apartments and they're doing their work from home jobs is going to increase the value of your community. And you look at Austin and places where this has happened.
And for me, I have more sensitivity to the NIMBY mindset the further away from the city you get. But when you're in the city, you're selecting to be in the most amenitized place around. And so I think there should be less restrictions when you're right in the city. If people are 2 hours away from the city, I think it's right for them to say there shouldn't be apartments here because I've drove 2 hours away to get away from other people. And I think that's fine. But you can't be 1 mile away from the best job center in the entire state of North Carolina and complaining about new housing. I think that we need to be more contextual about like when does it make sense to block new housing and when it doesn't. And to me, when it doesn't is when it's right close to all the infrastructure and the investment that the cities have already built, billions of dollars in the city. We need to give people access to that.
Tesho, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the content that you've produced is that it's clear that athletic mindset that you had of we as athletes are always trying to envision success. You're thinking about the game. You're thinking about, I'm sure you're envisioning yourself as a professional soccer player. I think what I've seen very clearly in a lot of your content is you've envisioned and your company has envisioned what will Camp North End look like. And so now you get to have those little moments where you're walking in the development and you have the surefire burgers and people living in kinship. I'm curious as you look ahead 5-10 years and you still have lots of land to develop, you still have lots of homes you want to build. Is there an element that you, as you envision that, you think, if this is true, then we've done our job, right? Or what does success look like for you guys as you envision finishing out this community?
To me, actually, success for Camp North End would be for people to say that Camp North End is a neighborhood. Because right now, people go there and is it an outdoor mall or is it like a campus or like people don't really know how to label it. But I want it to really stitch into the fabric of North Charlotte and feel like a neighborhood. And people just say, oh yeah, there's the Noda neighborhood where I live and then Camp North End's another neighborhood. So I think making it really like feel and come off as a neighborhood would be success to me. And neighborhoods are durable, whereas like a mall might come and go or a retail strip center might come and go, but a neighborhood is durable, it's forever. So I think if we're able to cement ourselves as a great neighborhood in the north side of Charlotte, that would be success.
To that point, I grew up as an MLS fan, went to Galaxy games, Real Salt Lake games. Now, we don't have a team here in Tampa, and we can't cheer for anybody in Orlando or Miami. Those are like rival cities. But so my son and I have started following the EPL. And I think something that I didn't really appreciate, to your point, is the teams that we know, the Chelseas, the Evertons, the Crystal Palace, those are neighborhood names, right? Those aren't necessarily the city. There's no London soccer team, at least not in the EPL, right? And so the idea of a neighborhood, right, is really powerful. And I appreciate that distinction of Camp North End today is a development, right? But if we're successful, it's a neighborhood. I'll also share, Tesho, I think one of the things that you're doing and I appreciate you coming on the podcast, is you're inspiring others. And I think one of my takeaways from this is there's not one person or one policy that can help our country with the housing affordability and more walkable neighborhoods. But I feel more inspired. If I'm ever so fortunate to be in the position to invest in real estate developments, I want to make Odessa, Florida, a walkable neighborhood, right? I want to make it a neighborhood that has offices and retail and residential the way that you guys are building. So I think you're doing a really great work, and I appreciate you telling your story with us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And for me, obviously, I'm here in Charlotte working on Camp North End, which is one project, one neighborhood. But I want to see Charlotte become a more walkable city more broadly and across the country. But I'll start with Charlotte. Right now in Charlotte, we have 10 of those walkable pockets I was talking about where you can get around with a car, without a car if you want, depending on the day. And I want to see that grow to 30. I'm not going to build 30 walkable neighborhoods in Charlotte, but I hope to be part of a wave of people who are doing so. And there's other developers here working on it, and I hope to get my voice out there, encourage more developers to get in on that, and encourage the people of Charlotte to just think this is something we can do and should allow to happen. The demand is there, like you said. Like right now, Charlotte is probably, 90% pretty suburban feeling. The demand for a more urban feeling city is at least 50%. Even let's say it's 30 or 40%, there's a huge delta between the urban experiences people want and what they can have. There will always be suburbs, especially in a city like Charlotte, but there's way more demand for people to have urban experiences that they're not provided with them. And so I think meeting that unmet demand is a huge opportunity in Charlotte and Tampa all the way across the country.
I agree. I think that as the interest rates come down and we see the next wave of housing development, I think that the untapped demand needs more supply. So I'm hopeful we see more projects. That's why it's so important to tell this success story that you guys are having. Tesho, we like to end just to make sure our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and just feel free to tell us the first thing that comes to mind. Here at our office in Tampa, because it is suburban, we've got a billboard right along. We've got a highway going past our office. So if we were to say, all right, Tesho, it's your billboard. It's your turn this month to put a slogan up there or a saying. What's an opinion that you'd put up on that billboard?
I would say build better neighborhoods.
Good. Let's keep it simple. I think we know what you mean there.
Yep.
All right. This is a funny one because usually when we say if you could retire, people haven't actually retired. Only pro athletes get to retire, air quotes. But let's say that you were retiring out of being a developer. Is there a philanthropic cause that you're passionate about that you would dedicate yourself full time to?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record and self-serving, but I would fund just like beautiful buildings in my city. Like here in Charlotte, for example, Hugh McCall, he's a longtime banker, and Hugh McCall really put the city on his back and invested a lot of his money into, and it wasn't always a financial return, but he built beautiful buildings and funded the arts and stuff like that. It's hard for me to imagine a better legacy than to do something like that. And the world has a long history of wealthy people like funding the arts or just beauty in their own city. So I think like funding more, I don't know, I'd bury the street lines outside of these houses, but just really investing in beauty in the city and bringing more beauty to our public space.
That's fantastic. And we have a tagline here at Funnel, which is renter-centric. For you all at Kinship, if you were to think about what would a renter-centric, what does that mean to you? Finish that sentence for me.
Renter-centric means hospitality, making people feel like they're not just living here but they're being taken care of. I want to give people that really 5-star experience from the moment they move in until the moment they move out and go to the next part of their life.
And as you think about the future of housing, right? What is that to you? Finish the sentence. The future of multifamily is...
Yes, especially when you say the future of multifamily, I would say smaller. Like right now, houses are getting built. There's a huge gap between townhomes and like 300 unit apartment buildings because that's just where the financing makes sense. But yeah, I don't know. I think that we might be able to unlock a little bit smaller projects, and I think it does help build community. And actually at Camp North End, at Kinship, our project is 300 units, but it's split across 2 buildings, and it does feel a little bit more intimate. And so I think the future of multifamily housing is smaller. Even those 10, 12, 20 unit buildings, you get to know your neighbors, you people walking in and out of the house. I think that's the future.
I love that because to your point about the main amenity of Kinship being the walkable neighborhoods. I lived in New York for a little while, been to Tokyo. Very small housing units, amazing amenities everywhere, and therefore the community is always together. So that makes a ton of sense. All right, what's a value that you refuse to compromise on?
I would say just being a good person. And so I say this sometimes, but when I played my soccer career, my mom was like, I don't care if people remember you as a good soccer player. I want them to remember you as a good person. And I carried that with me every day. When I was on the field competing, I tried to show respect to my teammates, to my opponents, to the ref. When I'm back at the facility, I'm trying to show respect to the front office people, to the kit men who are cleaning our jerseys. And so just being a good person to everybody I meet is something I don't compromise on.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people follow along on the journey with Camp North End?
Yeah, Camp North End, follow the Instagram page. Just type in Camp North End, you'll find them there. And then me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, like you said, Tesho Akindele. I think I'm the only one that would pop up with that name. And then same thing on X or Instagram. I'm all over the place. But yeah, follow along. Or if you're in Charlotte, you'll find me at Surefire, like I said.
Awesome. All right, we'll have to hit you up for some burgers, Tesho. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.